We are live streaming from the millinery shop, Margaret Hunter's shop here at Colonial, Williamsburg. My name is Janae Whitaker, and I have the honor of being the mistress of the millinery and mantua making trades here in the foundation. Millinery, of course, is the ornament to the wardrobe, what today in the 21st century we probably would categorize as accessory to the wardrobe. And then mantua making is the 18th century word for the dressmaker. Of course, we're still waiting for sewing machines to be invented, so all this work is by hand. But in addition to making items, the milliner often imported a wide assortment of goods, from tea and patent medicines to shoes and jewelry. Today, I am wearing about 30 different items individual, some of them sewn on, like my elbow ruffles, and some of them pinned, like the cap bow. But the milliner is going to make and sell nearly every single item that I'm wearing, including 18th century glasses.
Janae, could you tell us more about what you're wearing?
What I'm wearing, I've got a linen gown and matching petticoat, my apron, my cap, my elbow ruffles, and my neck handkerchief are all of the same fabric. Often at this time period, they were made and or imported as sets or suits of items. You can really dress up a gown by changing the millinery or the ornaments to the wardrobe. In addition, of course, today I've also got my stays, which could be made by the mantua maker, although generally was made by the tailor or stay maker, although milliners did import them occasionally ready-made. But the idea is to have this garment engineered to be comfortable to the person wearing them. The gown is cut to the lady and her stays. Now, you can have a gown made in the 18th century long distance. So if you were here in Virginia and wanted a gown made in London, you could send a gown or a pair of stays to the mantua maker of your choice with instructions of the latest design, the latest fabrics. And how many months later it would be arriving here, probably at the port of Yorktown. During the Revolution, our milliner, Margaret Hunter, is the only milliner known to be still importing, or she has imports, and she's also the only milliner out of 5 who we know of who is still open for business. So we consider Margaret Hunter a pretty successful businesswoman. Millinery, mantua making are often trades that are owned and operated by women. So it was a pretty good career opportunity for the 18th century, and I must admit it's been a wonderful career opportunity here in the 20th and 21st centuries as well.
Heidi had a question. She sees a mallet in front of you. What is that for?
The mallet. Trims are often made by the milliner, and this particular one is great fun to make. We have a pinked edge. So no pinking shears, we have a pinking iron that is literally hammered into the fabric to cut the scalloped edge. And I must admit that when the pinking is going on, it actually takes place outside the front steps of the shop because it makes so much noise. It's the only time that hand sewing or our trade can compete with the silversmiths next door with the hammering that they do. Other trims for gowns, for instance, are matching the fabric. This particular dress with its serpentine trim is the fashion for the late 1750s. It's a sack, which means the back of the gown is pleated and left free to float. Those pleats are held in place securely and fitted around the stays by a set of ties or lacings at the center back. Obviously, to complete the gown, you need a stomacher, and that would be pinned in. To complete the bottom half, you need a petticoat, although in this case, the 18th century problem occurred that just there wasn't enough fabric to make a complete petticoat, and so the 18th century solution is a gown and an apron. There are advertisements that list gown and apron of the same fabric. So this particular piece is tied around the waist like an apron and completes the gown. A wonderful way of using the fabric. Another way of using up your fabric is by piecing, so that you're not wasting any of the investment, because fabric can be expensive. Although cotton, wool, linen, and silk came in an incredible range of prices in the 18th century, and a person was sure to find a fabric that they liked within what the pocketbook was comfortable with.
Samantha and Kimberly were both had some questions about lace. How much would it cost? Is it important? Is it imported or made in Williamsburg? Who would have made it? And so forth.
In a shop like this, the lace is going to be imported. It's going to be imported through England, and it might be English lace. It actually might be French or Dutch or Italian lace, or even German lace. And then Dresden work is an embroidery made to look like lace. And Dresden work is taught in schools here in Virginia, embroidery schools for young ladies. There is very little documentation that there was lace making here within the colony of Virginia, as far as I know. But it can be ranging in price from a few pennies a yard to a suit, which can include the cap, again, the neck handkerchief, maybe the elbow ruffles, to as much as 150 pounds sterling, depending on the quality of the lace. So you could spend a fortune on it or not.
We have two questions from Evelyn. She wanted to know if you did embroidery here, and also if milliners would have taught young girls to sew.
Actually, sewing is something that all of our apprentices would have come to the shop at the age of, say, 11 or 12 or even 14 or 15. They already know how to sew. My job as the mistress of the trade is to teach them how to sew in a professional manner, but also the art of cutting out. Millinery, you cut out with geometry, squares, rectangles, and triangles, like this little boy's shirt here. Perfect geometry lesson, well cut, no waste of material. Embroidery, yes. There are milliners who draw patterns for embroidery. There are milliners who do embroidery. And I must admit that embroidery is one of my all-time favorite things to do. One of my favorite projects was an under petticoat border that we did years ago. The weavers wove the fabric, copying the corded cotton, and then dyed all the yarns so we could match the yarn to the original. And so this under petticoat, perhaps a person would have gotten a glimpse of when a very fashionable lady got in and out of her carriage, or danced a lively reel, or certainly when you were working on it with your friends.
Riley and Madeline, each coincidentally age 9, were wondering how long it takes to make a gown.
A gown can take anywhere from about 10 hours to make from start to finish. The fanciest gown we've ever made here in the Margaret Hunter shop took us 120 hours. But that was a ball gown that had lots and lots and lots of trim on it. But there are, if an 18th century person bought a gown, a common gown, just a plain ordinary dress, actually like the one I'm wearing, they would have paid about the equal to a day's wage for the making of the gown. So I think it's within the realm of possibility that this 18th century mantua maker is going to be able to make it in a workday. 12-hour workday, of course, but hopefully even less than a workday.
We had a couple of questions about colors. Melissa and Savannah both wondering what were popular colors, and if there was color choice based on age. Were there colors that you would outgrow, for example?
Actually, colors, just like today, are going to be in and out of fashion constantly. And so you would have watched the ladies' magazines, or read the ladies' magazines, or in fact, on a Sunday afternoon in the park, watched the fashion leaders, what they were wearing. In 1774, I believe, the fashionable colors changed 5 times in that single year. As far as I know, as soon as a young woman reaches the age of being wearing adult fashion, whether she's 12 or 15 years old, she's wearing the same styles and the same fabrics and the same colors as other adult women. Children, on the other hand, if you're categorized as a child early on, they thought that having something in white was one of the easiest colors to keep clean. You can translate that to mean it's the easiest to bleach. But other than that, the fashionable colors change constantly.
And see, Jennifer and Annalise were both asking about fabrics. What would be the most common sorts of fabrics for you to make something out of?
The most common fabric, probably what you would have had the most of in your wardrobe was linen, because your innermost layers, the shifts, the under petticoats, and then of course summer wear in linen as well. Cotton is very popular. Cotton and silk woven together, silk and linen, wool, every combination imaginable is popular.
Michelle and Martha were both wondering about patterns. Were they sold there? If so, or then, if so, how were they purchased? And do you make patterns to keep them to use again?
Patterns. The 18th century definition for a pattern is the shape that is cut. And as a mantua maker, I tend to cut the linen as the shape. Well, the linen becomes the lining of that garment, and then it's used to cut out the outer fabric. So it's incorporated into the garment. Next year or next couple of months from now, when a new gown is made, the process is typically repeated. The 18th century have patterns for things like elbow ruffles or caps. In fact, there's a wonderful news item about a milliner complaining that her apprentices was too lazy to go upstairs to get the cap patterns, and so she made up a bunch of caps that were too small and unusable. So there are some things we have patterns for in the 18th century, but for gowns, it's the cut by eye to the person that's typical. Brian
and Jill were both curious about the sort of typical toolkit of a milliner.
Typical toolkit. The most important tool we have are our eyes. And then, in my opinion, the next most important is my thimble. It's going to help me push that needle through the fabric. Pins, needles, scissors. You don't need even a tape measure if you have a piece of linen tape that you can pin the edges to. Doing measurements with inches and numbers is really only important if you're selling the fabric. You can sell it by the inch, the quarter, the nail, or the yard, or the L. So there's a lot of math involved in this particular trade is also.
Joanne was wondering how many dresses might an average woman own? Or
Oh, you know, I would give a whole lot to know that answer from the 18th century. Very few people then, as now, keep inventories of their clothing. So it's hard to say what is in an active wardrobe. But here in Williamsburg, we have an inventory of a woman who was a nurse midwife. Her name was Mary Cooley. She died in 1778, and she had a son who was a miner. And so they needed to inventory her estate to see what was going to be available for this young child. And that inventory includes 9 gowns, was it 11 gowns and 9 shifts? But it's a fairly substantial wardrobe. Although, as a nurse midwife, the clothing that she probably wore to work, the linens and the washing clothing, don't make it into the inventory. So it's likely she had even a bigger inventory, had more clothes. But who's to say?
Heidi, Martha, and Marty were all asking about your pinball. If you could.
Oh, my pinball.
Yeah.
It's a piece of embroidery that is attached to an equipage, which actually has my initials on it. And it's a wonderful place to keep straight pins. Other of us in the shop today keep our scissors on the same string so that they're always available to us. But that added detail of, you know, having my pins and right by me is kind of important.
Jessica was wondering, you know, in thinking about Colonial Williamsburg, we have a weaver, a tailor, a milliner. What are the borders between those different trades?
Well, the trades even in the 1700s overlapped. So for instance, a woman might go to the tailor to have her stays made, or she might have them made by a well-trained and skilled mantua maker. On the other hand, her riding habit may be made by the tailor, or it could be made by the mantua maker. The weaver typically works in a plantation setting and is making the fabrics that are wanted for that plantation. They can be coarse and rough fabrics. They can be exquisitely fine fabrics if that's what's wanted. Today, we all work together because we have our specialties, and our weavers, who are also our dyers, as I said, dye out all the wool needlework yarns that we use here in the shop.
So Alex was wondering about race. Were shops segregated? Were people of all colors doing this work? Were there enslaved people in the shops?
Yes. Margaret Hunter is known to have had 5 enslaved adults, one of which, we think her name was Aga, was also known as a clear starcher, ironer, and pastry cook. So a wonderful combination of extreme skills to be able to do all that. Another of the enslaved was a young man named William Chavers. He may have been Margaret Hunter's footman, helping to serve the customers, or she also owned a horse and a wagon, and he could have been her wagon driver, or both. We don't know. But in order for Margaret Hunter to be successful, those enslaved individuals are also helping to keep the home fires burning, doing the laundry, doing the cooking, cleaning. And in many homes in the 18th century, the lady's maid is a skilled milliner, mantua maker, sometimes hairdresser, and laundress as well. We know that in England, that ladies required their maids to have those skills. And we're finding that here in the colonies, some of the ladies' maids in the enslaved population also have those skills as well.
Denise and Marty were both wondering about what you store in the trunks behind you.
A shop like this in the 18th century did not display the goods. So you came in, we would ask, what would you wish to be shown? You might be sitting at the counter having some of that pastry that Miss Aga perhaps was making, and at some point you'll say, I really want to see those stomachers. And so the drawer is brought out and the customer tumbles the shop with the goods on hand. In this box, this box has one of those pairs of stays, which of course, since they are ready-made, you would have to try on a number of them to find a pair that was comfortable and fit. And apprentices are given the job of putting things away.
Sloane was curious about where the pins were fabricated.
Pins. Well, as far as I know, there's not a great number of pins or needles manufactured on this side of the Atlantic. So when we stop importing from England, we have to buy pins and needles from somewhere. But as an English colony, they're coming from England. They have begun to make pins and needles in such a way that one craftsman does one step, another craftsman does another one, and so on. So the manufacture has gone up, the price has gone down, and so you can buy straight pins by the hundreds. And in the 1700s, you could buy needles in packages of 25, which is pretty much the same way we do today.
Jeremy was curious about flags. Did milliners ever make flags?
Milliners ever make flags? I don't know about my 18th century counterpart, but I have made flags, and I had the honor of helping do some of the research and study for the remaking of the flag for Fort McHenry for their 200th anniversary.
A somewhat related note, Tammy was wondering about soldiers' accessories. Would milliners ever take up that work?
During the Revolution, soldiers, at least at the first part of the war, are given clothing. Each soldier here in Virginia was to be given 2 shirts. So shirt making became a very big business, but that work would go through the public storehouse. Now, officers in any army provided their own clothing, and so as a milliner, I could make the shirts and the neckcloths, and of course the sword knots, the decorative sword decorations for that officer.
Regina was wondering if babies would wear dresses or gowns, and would milliners be involved in making that?
Making childbed linen is actually its own separate trade, but milliners, yes, making and selling baby baskets filled with the clouts and the what we would call a diaper today was called a clout. The fabric was diaper linen, and then gowns. And I think some of this clothing is in one of these drawers. So this little gown is a copy of an original from the Colonial Williamsburg collection. The original dating to perhaps the early to mid 1780s. We have infants' clothing, we have babies' clothing, and we have children's wear. Both boys and girls have those 3 distinctions: infants, babies, and children. And it might be at the age of 4 or 5 when a young child leaves off his gown and starts going to the tailor for his little boy's clothes.
wanted to know something about milliners themselves. Were they middle class, upper class?
Milliners, they came from pretty much all segments of society. There are some references where there are some milliners who married well and married into the aristocracy. But working with our hands, we're solidly middle sort. It takes money, though, to set up a business. And so a dowry or saving one's income would be the typical way of getting the 100 to 1,000 pounds sterling that was necessary to open a shop like this.
Anastasia was wondering about the dress behind you. What is that called?
The gown behind is a short sack, it's cut away in the Polonaise style. It is a French, we based it from a French 1778 print, fashion plate, but we Englished it. And that means we took the French design and interpreted what we thought maybe an English person would wish. It's more fitted in the torso, and it doesn't have quite as much trim as the French print has. It also is ankle length when worn, so one's shoes and buckles and stockings are pretty noticeable, which, by the way, the milliner is importing and selling these shoes, the buckles and the stockings as well.
Whitney and a handful of others have been curious about wouldn't many people make their own clothing in the 18th century?
Certainly, just about everybody knows how to sew. It's a life skill to be able to sew. And certainly making towels and tablecloths, which are rectangles or squares, is pretty easy to cut out. That, however, is the work of the seamstress, the person who sews the linens. And you certainly could cut out and make a shirt or a shift or an apron. But the question is, even in the 1700s, do you have the time to do it? And certainly nobody in the family needs only one shift or shirt. They always need 3 or 4. The making of the gowns, though, even if a family was making them at home, it's usually because there's someone within the trade that is helping or is actually doing the work.
Kelly was wondering about what would be the most expensive material that you would typically use.
The most expensive material I've ever run across was a silk brocade that did not have gold or silver thread in it, and it was valued at 55 pounds sterling the yard. The gold or silver, you would have bought the thread by the ounce, and that, of course, would be far more expensive. So, silk brocade. On the other hand, you can buy silk for as little as $1 a yard. So, an incredible range of prices when it comes to fabrics.
Savannah was wondering how common was embroidery on these dresses, or was it mostly reserved for pilots?
Embroidery. Only piece of clothing in the 1700s that I've not seen embroidery on are hoops. And I'm sure there's somewhere in the world there's a pair of hoops that have some sort of embroidery on them. But just like today, embroidery on clothing goes in and out of fashion. And the styles change as well. So it's a wonderful way to decorate the clothing. It's a wonderful way to spend time, doing something fun. But maybe you like plain fabrics, or maybe you like striped fabrics instead. It would be your choice.
Sharon was wondering, and as were others, can people today order things from the milliners?
We do occasionally get the opportunity to take custom orders. And with a gown, we'll make it, of course, totally by hand. And a customer would come to the shop and we would do the fittings. We'll cut it out right on them. And, you know, occasionally we sew a hat or something like that. But almost everything we use or we make is used within the foundation.
So we have time for one last question. Savannah was curious about, and said she's someone that's very interested in historical clothing today. What are some of the essential skills to get started in doing the kind of work that you do?
What are the essential skills? Well, the sewing, the hand sewing, my definition of a reproduction of a piece of clothing is to produce it again, reproduction, to produce it again. And in order to produce it again, you have to make it by hand. So practicing those hand skills, getting a nice even 9, 10, 12 stitches to the inch. But then understanding the fashion, looking at pictures, noticing the detail, noticing when those sleeves look like they're kind of twisted and when they're put on and fit straight. Those sorts of things are important. Understanding the fabric. And you know what? Just having a good time doing it is probably the most important.
Thank you so much, Janae. Do you have any final thoughts for our viewers today?
Well, this has been really fun sharing our trade and shop with you. I hope to actually see you in person here in the shop in the near future. And thank you.